And I'll just mention this for the folks who might tune in and catch it later on YouTube. We were having trouble getting the stream going on YouTube this morning, so it may not, you may not have seen the beginning of this. I hope you're back up to catch it. This morning, what I would like to do is to start something here. We're not going to finish it today. It's going to go on for a week or two or more. But I'd like to introduce everyone to one of my favorite teachers, one of my favorite authors, and we'll draw from some of Emmett Fox's works for the next couple of weeks. Now, the booklet that we're working from today is called The 7 Main Aspects of God. It's just a little pamphlet. I don't know, it's, let's see how many pages we got here. Looks like it's about 50 pages long. If you want a hard copy, you can buy it. I just checked this morning. Amazon has it. It's about $5 plus shipping. Excuse me. There's also an audiobook on YouTube. Somebody, sounds like a professional voice artist, read it, and it's available on YouTube if you like to listen to audiobooks. So one of the things I like to do, remember we're all like the four people who found the elephant in the dark, right? We're all kind of groping for this idea of what is this thing called God? What is God? And that's always the first talk of the first Sunday of every year. You know, what is your concept of God? And really, that's what we're doing all the time. All the time, we are trying to look at this intangible idea, this concept that goes beyond, as Joseph Campbell tells us, goes beyond every limitation of human knowledge, every limitation of human thought. That this word God is a metaphor for that which transcends every limitation of human consciousness. This is from Campbell. And when he said that, when I heard him say that, I stopped to think. I said, wow, you know, how powerful that is. Because when we're kids and we're told the word God, we form a mental image. We can't help but that. That's what we do, is we hear things and we read things and we see things, and something happens in that thing that we call our consciousness. And we start to create little mental images, little stories, you know. The human brain is like we're born to solve a puzzle, or we're just intrigued by a puzzle, you know. And this is how the mystery writers and the authors, this is how they keep our attention, you know. When went to a screenwriting workshop a few years ago with our youngest son, and the gentleman who was conducting it, he said, always leave the scene with a question, an unanswered question, and always begin the next scene with the answer. And that way you keep the audience kind of glued to the screen, you know. What was that? What did they just introduce there? What is this that's going on? And then a little while later in the program, when you get back to that sequence, a little while later they start to introduce material. So you say, oh, that's what goes with this. So something in the human psyche that we're always trying to take, sometimes things that don't quite fit together, and we're putting them together into trying to solve or create a story. I call it making mental maps. We make mental maps of the world, and we believe our mental maps are correct, but they're not. They hardly ever are, and particularly when it comes to the nature of the divine, because it is beyond our ability, our intellect's ability to grasp it, to figure it out. So the human experience, you know, we understand beginnings and middles and ends, and then we have the divine, which has no beginning, has no middle, and has no end. It just is. In the human experience, we understand that there are limitations to our knowledge, and yet the divine is that which is all-knowing. And in the human experience, we understand that there are limitations to our power, not only our physical power of our bodies, but the power that we can figure out how to use, the power to propel our ships and our planes and our trucks and things like that. There's just so much that can be done with what we know. Now, of course, there's more knowledge available to us, but all invention, everything moving forward is we kind of discover something that was always there, but we didn't know it was there. And so Emmett Fox tells us, for example, that in the biblical story of Exodus, we have this image of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and leading them with a pillar of flame. Now, of course, in those days, what they did was they had, you see the people in the front marching and holding up a flagstaff. Well, they had kind of like a torch, a little basket up on top that they had a fire in there, and that way people could see where the front of the column was going. And Emmett Fox tells us, he says, well, he says electricity was available then. Electricity was always available, and they could have had flashlights and seen their way across the desert with flashlights. But the human consciousness was not there yet. See, the human consciousness had not discovered that which was already there, had not put together the natural laws of the universe into a form that they could use. So we're constantly discovering, we're constantly evolving our concepts. And when it comes to this concept, the most important concept that we can hold, which is the concept of the divine, we are constantly evolving. So the four men in the dark room hold the elephant, and one has the leg and says the elephant is like a tree, and the other has the side and says the elephant's like a wall. And one has the trunk, and he says the elephant's like a snake, and the other has a tail and says the elephant's like a rope. And each of them is correct from their limited experience, but none of them has the full picture. And we want to understand that when it comes to exploring this concept of the divine, what the divine is, that we are constantly evolving. If we think we know all that there is to know, we don't, because it's not humanly possible for us to know all that there is to know. We will be forever, for eternity, we will be forever experiencing, understanding, growing in wisdom as to what the divine is. So looking at the works of different teachers and different religions and different philosophies, and kind of looking at how other cultures, other times, other ways of thinking kind of explore this concept of the divine, it helps us to expand. It helps us to kind of come back and say, well, wait a minute, do I believe this? Do I not believe that? What do I think? How do I know what I know? One of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. How do you know what you know? Excuse me. See, when we're kids growing up, we go to school or we go to Sunday school or we ask why too many times at home, we eventually get the answer, because I said so. Because I said so. Authority said so. In school, if you get very curious and you want to know more and you ask a lot of questions, the teacher will say, we don't have time for that. We have to learn what's going to be on the test. We have to cover the material that's in the curriculum. And of course, many times the curriculum is so chock full of facts to memorize that there may not be time for real understanding. The understanding that comes from inquiring, from asking questions, from wanting to know how to take this new piece of information we have and put it together with old information. Right? And then, of course, we at times come across a concept that is so great that it doesn't fit with any of our old information. This is the meaning of you can't put new wine in old skins. When we first try to learn something new, when we first get exposed to something new, what we tend to do is we try to relate that. That's part of the learning process. We get the new information and we say, well, how does that fit with everything else that I've ever learned? And we try to do that, and we try to fit it all together. And then maybe we can, maybe we can't, maybe we have to modify our previous understanding a little bit, and say, oh, okay, well, if I just modify the way that I used to look at things just a little bit, then this new bit of information kind of makes sense. It's a new type of something that I already knew. But then what happens is something comes along that is so radically different that it just kind of blows away. It blows away everything that we thought we knew. Also in the New Testament, we're told that there comes a time, excuse me, there comes a time that you have to scrape the building down to the foundation and start over. You can't just keep adding new stuff on to an old structure. You can't just keep kind of updating ideas or repairing things. You have to scrape it clean and you have to start over. So part of our process of growing, part of our process of learning, first of all, is we have to be willing to look at the things that we already know, and we have to be willing to update them or discard them as may be appropriate, or retain them. We might look at them and say, well, that still holds true. I still believe that. I'm still going to make that part of my operating system and my worldview, and go on from there. Or we may look at that and say, well, no, you know, I may have thought that way when I was little, or I may have thought that way even when I was big, but now that I think about it, I'm not so sure that works for me anymore. I'm not so sure as to how truthful that is. So I'm willing to let it go. I'm willing to modify. And I think an important thing for us to keep in mind when it comes to our spiritual growth is that our spiritual growth is not a process of adding things on. Emmett Fox will tell us this. He says it's not about plussing. You're not trying to add new things on. You're not trying to bring God to you. This would be words Joel Goldsmith might use. We're trying to bring God to us. And what we have to understand is that the omnipresence is already here. That the divine is everywhere present. It is all presence. That it is expressing its life in a costume that looks like us, in a character who acts like us and thinks like us. But as the wave is the ocean expressing itself as a wave, the divine is expressing itself as us. We want to come to that kind of understanding that we're told I and the Father are one and you and I are one. Right? There's a oneness, there's a unity, there's a singularity at work here. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring ourselves to constantly, persistently, I think Dr. Holmes says persistently and consistently, we are asking ourselves, how do I know what I know about the divine? How do I know what I know about life? How do I know what I know about myself? The oracle at the temple of Apollo at Delphi said, know thyself, know thyself. That was one of the inscriptions there. Know thyself. It is very easy. We could say, oh yeah, I know who I am. I'll show you my driver's license. And of course that's not at all who we are. And that is a persona. So who am I really? So by looking and examining and reading and listening to different religions and different philosophies with a willingness to evaluate. I'm not saying to blindly accept anything that anybody says. You know, I loved. I told you this. The Dalai Lama was doing a presentation in London, and after the presentation, he had questions and answers. And a young Buddhist monk in his saffron robes came up and asked a question, and the Dalai Lama answered, and he says, well, you can read this scripture and it says this, and you can read that scripture and it says that, and you can listen to this, and the Buddha said that, and you know, that's what all the different teachings say. However, just because I told you that is not a good enough reason for you to accept it. You must find the answer that works for you. You must explore these things for yourself. And even the Buddha in his teaching says, you know, you don't accept things just because I tell you. You have to explore them for yourself. In the New Testament, we are told, you know, to test the gods to see if they're true gods or false gods. We have to make this our own. We have to come to an ownership of our belief. It's no longer I chuckle because I'm thinking of Forrest Gump. You know, it's not possible for us to go through life just accepting the opinions that other people give us and expect to grow. We can go through life, we can get through life. All you have to do is keep eating and drinking and breathing, and eventually you'll get through life. But there won't be growth. There won't be growth, you see. You'll still have the same ideas that you had when you were little. One time we were many years ago, Lori and I were in a first year class, and one of our classmates went back home to a high school reunion. I don't know how many years it was, but it was a bunch, I'll tell you that. And he came back to class the following week, and he was just terribly disappointed. And he said, you know, he walked into the same bar in town where they used to hang out before he left there, and he says there were all his high school friends sitting on the same stool, drinking the same drinks, and talking about the same football game that they had played when they were 16 years old. He says, like they just never left high school. And of course that was his judgment. That was just the way he felt, and he just realized, I guess like Scott Fitzgerald said, you can't go back home again, you know. He tried to go back home, and he had changed, but in his estimation, his friends had not. So we want to be constantly updating our ideas. We want to constantly be asking ourselves, or to put it in Emmett Fox's terms, we want to constantly be thinking about God. Thinking about God. So Emmett Fox, just a little bit of a bio here, why he's one of my favorite authors, and why I think he's an important person for us to consider his works. We're going to look at his way of looking at the world and see how that can help us to possibly update or challenge our own ideas, and then kind of work through that challenge, because, you know, as Nietzsche said, that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Working through and then taking ownership for what we think. Oh, I don't agree with that. That's not so. But when we get done, whatever we have left is going to be ours, at least for the time being, right? Until the next time that we stretch and grow. So remember where we're starting, what our premise is, right? Dr. Holmes is telling us that the fundamental issue that we're dealing with, that all human problems come from an idea of separation. We've been born into a culture that believes that we are somehow separated from that which is expressing itself as us. And because of this ignorance, because of this lack of knowledge, or because of this false belief, we go through life having a human experience with ups and downs. And the solution, if you want to call it the solution, is to get rid of our erroneous beliefs. So the presence is already here, the goodness is already here, the divine is already here. We don't have to try to bring God to us. But what we want to do is let go of all of the ideas that we believe to be true that are not true. Ungodly ideas, if you want to think of it that way. And we pick it up almost by osmosis, even if we never set foot in a Sunday school. I think we form opinions about how the world works for the time that we're very little. You know, little pitchers have big ears, I think was the saying. You know, children observe, and the children are constantly trying to figure out, how does this world work? Who are these people? You know, what are they doing here, and how does this world work? So Emmett Fox was an associate and the publicist, or the front man, as you would say, for Thomas Troward. Now, excuse me, Thomas Troward was an English judge. He was an Episcopalian, and he went to India for some 20-odd years, where he ran a civil court in India, and there he became exposed to the ideas of the Hindus' teaching, and he was able to step back and see the similarity. And I think this is important. The intellect likes to look for things that are different and why things are different. You know, if you've ever moved to a place where the church that you went to was not the predominant church, you know, the typical questions you would get is why do you believe this or why do you believe that? That's different than the way we believe. And of course the implication was, well, that's wrong. It's wrong because we don't believe that. So the human intellect kind of looks at the differences of things and tries to understand how they are different. And in so doing, typically tries to defend its own position. This is my position, that position is different, and this is what's wrong with that position. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can just turn on the TV and listen to the way people speak, and you'll see that we do that. The first thing they do is tell you what's wrong with the other party's position or the other church's position or the other person's position. But Troward had the ability to step back and say, well, wait a second, this isn't really too different. If we get back far enough, Ralph Waldo Trine, in his book In Tune with the Infinite, which is also one of my favorite books, he said there's a silver thread that runs through all religions. If we find that thread and follow that thread, let's see what happens. Because we're all talking about love, right? We're all talking about peace. We may have different ideas about what that is or how to get there, but that's what we're trying to talk about. And if we focus on the similarities and not get caught up in the differences, we can start to see that as Campbell might tell us, the ideas are trying to come forward, the same ideas, but they're trying to come forward through the costumes and the color and the characters of that particular culture. Yet the fundamental ideas are the same. One of my teachers in the college here said that all cultures have some common myths, the mythology, not a fable, but a story that holds teaching value. But everybody has a creation myth. Everybody has a creation myth. Every people, every culture has asked the question of who am I and why am I here? And they have these creation stories. In the Judeo-Christian culture, of course, it's the book of Genesis. Other cultures have similar creation stories. So there's like this impulse within the human consciousness that is trying to discover, that is seeking the divine, and the divine itself is causing us to seek. That which we are seeking has caused us to seek. That which we are seeking is seeking us. So all people of all time have come up with different solutions and different answers. And if we look at those for what is similar, it expands our viewpoint. We have to let go of the ideas of right doing and wrong doing, as Rumi tells us. And we have to step into but where is the love here, see? Where is the oneness? Where is the singularity? So Troward was able to do that. And in some of the web pages, they refer to Thomas Troward as the point where East meets West. Because he was able to look at the teachings of the East, he was able to look at his own Christianity as taught in the Episcopal Church, and he was able to say, wow, these two things are not necessarily so far apart, and maybe we can grow from that. Troward became a very popular speaker in England, and he wrote many books, I won't say many, but he wrote half a dozen books or so, still published today. And even the Archbishop of Canterbury used to preach sermons on Troward's books. But Troward is hard to understand for most people today. He was a lawyer, he was a judge, he spoke in terms of logic and reason. You have a major premise, you have a minor premise, and you have a conclusion. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C kind of logic is what I'm talking about. And his works were largely written down or transcribed from speeches that he gave, from talks. I've never seen anything like it. There's like one chapter I think is just one sentence long. But it has 8 million semicolons in it, where people just didn't understand where to put the punctuation. So I guess when in doubt, put a semicolon in. So Emmett Fox was Troward's frontman. Excuse me. He went to advance man, you might call it. He went to the towns where Troward was going to be speaking. He booked the venue. He put the advertisements in the newspaper, had the tickets and the flyers printed up, and all of the things that you would expect an advance man to do. And that's what Emmett Fox did. And later in his life, Emmett Fox said that what he wanted to do was he wanted to go and to make accessible the teachings of Thomas Troward. And in other words, he was politely saying that people weren't understanding Troward. What he was saying was good, but it was hard to grasp, you know. And one of the things that we learn as we learn about becoming teachers, and particularly teaching adults, is we've got to find a way to get the information to people in a manner that they can get a hold of it, they can grab it. You know, I talk about putting a handle on it. You know, so you had the 4 blind men with the elephant. You know, what we needed was a handle somewhere on that elephant, so somebody could grab onto that and say, "Oh, this is what it is. This is what it is." So Emmett Fox wanted to go out and to present the information in a manner that people identified with, and he had quite a knack for telling stories. At one point, he came to New York City, and he was the pastor of the Divine Science Church there, which, by the way, Ernest Holmes' brother Fenwick had previously been the pastor of that church. And Emmett Fox started preaching, and he had to move his venue to the Hippodrome, which was a racetrack, horse racing track. And he would draw 3,000 to 4,000 people on a Sunday would come out to hear his message. That's how popular he was back in the 50s or so. And I'll just give you one example of a story he told that I read years ago, and it stayed with me, just to kind of give you the flavor of his writing. He had a little booklet, and it's like day by day with Emmett Fox or something like that, but just a little one-pager that you would read every day. And this one day he was telling a story about this little old lady. It was spring cleaning time, and she had all of the doors and all of the windows of her house open, and she had her broom out, and she was just going to town, and she was, you know, stirring up a pile of dust and airing out the house and getting all of the dust and stuff that had accumulated from tracking in and out over the winter. She was cleaning the house. She was getting that all going. So she has all the doors, she has all the windows open, and she doesn't know it, but the circus was in town. And one of the lions escaped from the circus, and the lion was running loose around the town, and it spotted the door of her house that was open, and it ran into her house, and it ran into a little cupboard underneath the staircase. And if you've ever seen the old houses where people would find ways to use the spot under the stairs for storage. And she didn't have her glasses on, and she just saw this creature kind of run and hide in there. And in her mind, remember I said we make up stories. In her mind, it was a donkey. And she says, you know, I have my door open, I'm sweeping out the house, and this wild donkey comes running and is hiding in my house. And she goes and she gets the broom, and she gets in under the cupboard, and she starts beating the donkey with this broom. And she doesn't know it's a lion. She's beating the donkey with the broom and telling him, get out of there, you don't belong there. And it scared the lion so bad, the lion ran out of the house, and just with that, the men from the circus were coming up with the nets, and they threw the nets over the lion, and they captured the lion. And one of the men said, you know, are you okay? You know, the lion just came out of your house. And at that moment, she realized it was a lion, and she fainted from fright, you know. Now, we've got that picture. We've got that picture in our head. He painted a beautiful picture for us in our head. We've got this picture of this frail little old lady just whacking this lion with the broom. And she was okay as long as she believed it was a donkey. But the instant she found out it was a lion, fear took over. Fear took over. And she passed out from fear. And what he's telling us is that it's what we believe, you know. It's what we believe affects us. And if we go through life without fear, if we go through life with this I can do it attitude, you know, even the wild animal had enough sense to get out of her way. You know, she made the lion believe too. So he was telling us to pay attention to what we're thinking, pay attention to what we believe, because the situation was exactly the same. Whether she was afraid or not afraid, the lion was the lion. But the circumstances were different when she believed it was a donkey, when she believed that she had the power over it, when she believed that she could drive this thing out of her house, she did. When she believed it was a lion and it could hurt her, she passed out. So he's inviting us to pay attention to our thoughts. And this is just one example of many, many, many stories excuse me, that he gives us and he tells us. So Emmett Fox started, just a little bit more by the way of bio on him. He became very popular in New York City. He wrote a book called The Sermon on the Mount, which addresses Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, which is largely considered to be the teachings of Jesus, not the teachings about Jesus, but the teachings of Jesus. It became very popular. In fact, it was the first book that AA used when they started, before they developed the Blue Book. Right? So AA started and eventually realized that they couldn't align themselves with any particular religious belief. They wanted to be open to people of all beliefs. So they had to move away from it. But that was the first book that they used. And he wrote another book called The Sermon on the Ten Commandments. A metaphysical explanation of the Ten Commandments. So a very popular writer, very popular in his time, very colloquial in his expression. But everything has a kind of, after you're done, you go, wait a second, that was pretty powerful. So he wrote this little pamphlet called The Seven Main Aspects of God. And what he's talking about here is exactly the four men with the elephant. You know, we can't get our mind around God. We can't get our intellect around whatever the divine is. It's just too big for us. So we have to kind of take it in little pieces or aspects. See? And by contemplating these different aspects of the divine, we come to know more of it, know more of the divine in some particular way, in some particular aspect. So he says it's very important. Now he's coming at this from the point of view of problem solving. He says we are told in spiritual teachings, in metaphysics or New Thought, we are told to turn entirely away from the problem and to turn towards God. But how can we turn towards God if we don't know how to think about God? What is this God that we're thinking about? What kind of a God are we thinking about? Now, I want to talk about this business of problem solving for just a minute, which is a lot of times when people come into a new religion, a new teaching, or new philosophy, you know, they're motivated by discomfort. Not all the time, but sometimes, most of the time. In fact, there's a book that I enjoy called, I'm trying to think of the exact title, it's American Religion and Alternate Medicine, I believe is the title of the book. American Religious Experience and Alternate Medicine. Excuse me. And the idea there was that right after colonial America, in the 50 years following the Revolution, the doctors in the towns were typically the priests. Remember, the East Coast was founded by the English, and the Episcopal Church was the official church. But the best educated people in town were typically the clergy. So when somebody got sick, they had to go to their clergy for treatment. Excuse me. If the doctor couldn't heal them or cure them, well, then they had to seek out somebody else, right? And so typically what would happen is they would seek out somebody else and they would get a different view of religion. And this is how alternative religions spread. And in fact, traditional religions try to discourage that by denigrating old wives' tales. Oh, don't listen to anything those alternate healers tell you, because they're just a bunch of old wives wagging their tongues, you know. But what would happen is people would go to the alternate healers and they would get exposed to a different way of believing. Excuse me, my throat is really dry today. They would get exposed to a different way of believing, and if they were healed, well, then they would say, well, what is this? You know, what is this about this other way of believing? Maybe I need to go study more about that. Maybe I need to go become a student, right? Because the proof of the pudding is in the results. And you can look at the New Thought movement in this country, starting with Quimby, through Mary Baker Eddy, through Emma Curtis Hopkins, onto the Fillmores in Unity, onto the Brooks Sisters in Divine Science, into Ernest Holmes. I do apologize. I'm going to have to get a big drink there. So many times people will come into a new teaching, and they come because there's something not working right in their life, and they're not satisfied with the answers they're getting from whatever their traditional or usual way of thinking is, and it's the whack on the side of the head that causes us to seek. So for this reason, sometimes people say, "Well, God sent me that to teach me a lesson." Huh? I don't believe that for a minute. You learned a lesson, but if you had been open to learning lessons previously, you wouldn't need the whack on the side of the head. So there comes a time where we move beyond problem solving in our growth. In other words, there may be problems to solve, and we get them solved. But then there's opportunities to pursue. So we don't want to just be out of pain or out of lack or all of the other negatives, but we want to live life more fully. See, we want to step into the fullness of life. We want to step into the joy of life, the enthusiasm of life. We don't want to just go through the motions of getting up, eating, and going to sleep. We want to live. We want to live. We want to be alive. We want to feel alive. I think that's what a lot of the thrill seeking is about, you know, in the moment. Again, I apologize. In the moment of whatever the thrill is, we feel alive. We feel alive. Sitting in the door of the jump plane, waiting for your opportunity to skydive. You're alive. You're alive. Everything about you is focused on that moment. So we move through problem solving. We move to greater living. Let's call it that. But then we actually move into the unity, into the oneness, into the beingness of the divine. Because God doesn't seek thrills. God is alive. God is the essence of life. God is everything that is living. So Emmett Fox, what he tells us when he's starting this little pamphlet, and of course we're going to have to continue this at least over the next week, maybe two, I don't know. But he tells us, consider this. We are told to turn away from the problem. Let's say the problem is a health issue. And to turn entirely towards God. Now, how do we do that if we don't know how to think about God? How do we do that? See? Because for many of us, what has happened is we have grown up with what's called the anthropomorphic idea of God. God is a big person in the sky. God is just like us, only bigger, stronger, smarter. But God has enemies. Excuse me. God gets angry. God punishes people. You know, God is very much like a king in the Middle East, you might think. Mood swings, you know, all of these kind of things. we've grown up with a concept of God that has God watching and judging everything that we do, and keeping a record of the good and the bad, you know. And this idea, you know, it even goes back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It goes back, predates Christianity. That somehow we are being observed, we are being tested, we are being tried. And God is keeping track of all this. And if we're good, we might get rewarded. And if we're not good, we will get punished. And even if we're good, we might have challenges just to test us, just to see, or to teach us, you know, to teach us a lesson. All these different things. Excuse me. All of these different ideas that we have grown up. So herein lies the problem, and this is where we're going to leave it for this week. Herein lies the problem. So we have this problem. Let's say we have a problem that has to do with health. And now we are going to turn to God. We're going to turn to the divine for the purpose of resolving the problem. Right? What we want is we want healing. We want health. And now we're turning our attention to a God who may or may not listen, who may or may not like us, and who in fact may have sent us the affliction in the first place. So what kind of an answer do you think we're going to get? We may or may not get an answer. Or it may persist because God wants to teach us more, or God wants to punish us more. Or all these different ideas that we have of the Santa Claus type of God that we grew up with, that we learned about as children. And what Emmett Fox is telling us now is, if we expect a different result, we have to change our thoughts. New thought. If you want a new experience, you have to have a new thought. So if we wish to have the solution to some particular problem, what we really want to do is we want to think properly about God as it relates to that problem. He calls this scientific prayer. We want to think properly about God. And he tells us that prayer, his definition, I'm giving you his definitions, prayer itself is thinking about God, according to Emmett Fox. Meditation, according to Emmett Fox, is thinking about God, some aspect of God as it relates to a particular problem. Excuse me. Now, of course, that's different than single point meditation, other types of meditation that we talked about. But I want you to understand the terminology that he uses. If you pick up this book and start to read it, it'll jump right out at you. So what he's telling us at the very beginning of the book, and where we're going to continue on, is that what we want to do is we want to find some aspect of God, some quality of God, some aspect of the very nature or the very being of God as it applies to whatever our particular problem is. God is life, God is love, God is truth, God is beauty, and so on. How does that relate to whatever the appearances are? Remember, in Christianity, in the New Testament, we're told, don't judge by the appearances, but judge by the righteous judgment. We're also told in the New Testament that God sends his rain on the just and the unjust alike. Not punishing, but everybody gets their good. So if we wish to effectively use prayer, thinking about God, to produce a change in conditions in our experience, a healing of some sort, we have to start by thinking about how we think about God. we have to ask ourselves, what do I believe about God? Where did this belief come from? Is it time for me to update it? And that's where we're going to pick up next week. And so it is.